Good evening and welcome to Poe Discussions with Jeanie and Carmen. Jeanie, you gonna say hi?
Hi. Actually visual today. So
Yes, you are with a very awesome background. Well, welcome back, and we have a very special guest this evening. We are so excited to welcome Mark Dawidziak. And Mark, if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself.
No, I lay claim to no other title except writer. I've been a writer, a professional writer for more than 45 years.
Okay.
For 43 of those years, I worked at newspapers, mostly as a film, TV, and theater critic. So, and I stopped my journalism career around April of 2020. So I've been exclusively writing books since then. My first book was published in 1982. And so there have been about 25 books since then, and so I'm pretty much exclusively a book writer, and the books are all over the map. The resume is a deeply schizophrenic resume, which is the first thing that I will cop to, which is people say, "What kind of books do you write?" And it always, I don't really know how to answer that, because there's fiction, there's nonfiction, there's biography, I've written a bit in the horror field, both fiction and nonfiction. There are books about television. There is a film book. So there's a little bit of everything. I once was at a book festival, and I was at a table, and they had a spread of my books, and the guy went by the table, and he nearly dislocated his neck doing a double take as he went by, because he's just like, and he was just, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I don't get it." And I said, "What's not to get?" He said, "Well, what's the common theme here?" And I said, "Me, I'm the common theme. I wrote all these. These are all my interests. There are books about Mark Twain. There's a book about Theodore Roosevelt. There's a book about Dracula. There's a book about the Night Stalker series, about Columbo. So there's a little bit of, I don't know if there is a rhyme or reason to it. It's just that I don't like repeating myself, and I, always like pursuing where the passions are. So
sounds like my bookcases.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, the very shorthand is I'm a writer, and I've been lucky enough to have spent more than 45 years being able to get paid for putting nouns and verbs together. So that's all I looked for when I started, and I've been very fortunate to been able to do that.
That's awesome. And I was going to say, with the different genres and things that you write, you've got a little bit in common with Poe, because he wrote several different genres as well. So that's really a neat thing.
Yeah, Poe was deceptively versatile writer, and both deceptively versatile and prolific. And he doesn't get enough credit for both, because a very small group of stories and poems have completely defined him.
Yes.
And that has kept us. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it is one of the reasons I wrote the book, was because I didn't think, people had an idea of, they all have an idea who they think Poe was. And the idea is based on a stereotype.
Yes.
The stereotype is based on a caricature, so you basically have this total misconception of who the actual Edgar Allan Poe was. And that includes, as a writer, is that when I was writing the book, and people learned that I was writing the book, and they'd say, "What are you working on?" I'd say I was doing a work on a biography of Edgar Allan Poe. There was always somebody there. There was always one person who would get this almost beatific look on their face, and they'd look at me like, "Oh, Edgar Allan Poe. I love Edgar Allan Poe." And then they'd say, and my lips would almost move with them on the next line. And I never challenged it, but the next thing they said was, "I've read everything he's written." And my mind would say, "No, you haven't.
Oh.
You haven't even scratched the surface. You have got one of those volumes that say the complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. And not even that is accurate or true. But you read that, and you think you have read everything he's written." But then, as I always say in every talk I give about Poe, to sort of drive home the misconceptions, that when they finally got around to doing Poe's collected works, and the first really good scholarly edition was done in the early 1900s. It was 17 volumes. He had written enough to fill, and that wasn't everything, because we have discovered more since those 17 volumes were done. So for somebody who only lived to be 40, and had wrote enough of such high quality to have filled 17 volumes, he was amazingly prolific, and he was a very amazingly dedicated artist. And I really think that's you can't sort of overestimate how much he probably inherited from his mother. Because Eliza Poe she was a very versatile actress. She was versatile. She's very dedicated. He was very dedicated, and she mastered a staggering number of roles in her short lifetime. She had mastered, had committed to memory a staggering number, because you had to if you wanted to work back then. So by inheritance, you see that artistic nature and that bent towards being prolific. You see that coming directly from his mother.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, since we are talking about your book, I wanted to hold it up for everybody to see. And I just want to say that I loved your book.
Thank you.
You went into detail on so many things, especially like his parents. There was more information you put in your book that I've ever read in any of the other biographies or research I've done. I was telling Jeanie this, and it just, all of the detail just impressed me so much. And I learned, like Jeanie and I know Poe, but we learned, because she read it too, we learned so much more from your book. And I appreciate that so much, because I feel like we don't know everything about him. We know a lot, but we learned so much more,
Well, that's good to hear. You can't hear that too much, too often.
Yeah. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah. The one thing that I enjoyed the most is you were putting into your book particular researchers that I had already looked into and I'd already read. And as you know, anytime you do research, there is such a plethora of information that you have to go through in order to put together and make it coherent, basically, to where it fits. And then when you were bringing in things like from Dr. Hal Poe, because both Carmen and I have met him and went to one of his, things about Edgar Allan Poe and horror and all that kind of stuff, and then a few others that you brought into your book, I was like, this is great, because for someone, me especially, I love doing research. It's my jam. And I love it that I can find something that can have it all condensed into one, because it saves us a lot of time.
Yes.
As you just said, you're never going to put everything is about in one place, because just for certain things there in history, there's always going to be things that you can't track down, things that were lost. You're just going by, first person points of view and diaries and journals. And so you're not going to get the whole picture, because you're only going to see maybe one side. You're not going to get it all. But I did enjoy hearing about the little things, the things that nobody looks for about Poe.
Poe's life it's not a very well documented life. There are whole years where we have very little information about what he's doing, or what his day-to-day life was like. The early 1830s in Baltimore. We don't know if he's working, where he's working. There's just, had he lived into the second part, or was born like 10, 20 years later, it would probably been a much better documented life than it was. You have these huge gaps, and one of the things that and I always say this about when people are interested in the book or ask about the book, I always try to explain and say, this is not an academic treatise on Poe. This is not a scholarly work. This is, it does use scholarship, and I hope it passes the test of what scholars want. But I set out to write a popular biography of Poe. I set out to write a a book that people would enjoy reading.
Yes.
And because that's the kind of writer Poe was, you know, and I also knew you can't fake it. You can't try to be a type of writer you're not. Now,
Right.
you know, I spent my lifetime, you know, as a popular writer, and I am not an academic. I have taught college classes as an adjunct, but I'm not, you know, I'm not really a professor. I just get to play one, you know, every once in a while. So, you know, and I was a journalist, you know, for most of that time. So when a journalist does a story, what do? Well, they go out and they interview people. You go out and you. So one of the things that how I approached the book was, and I knew I was taking a chance. I think, you know, there were two major chances I took with the book, and I think, you know, that also fits Poe. Is one is that the timeline, that there are two timelines. Is that you have one timeline which follows Poe through the last 4 months of his life, and another timeline which charts his biography, looks back alternating chapters until the two timelines meet at the end. And I knew that that was taking a chance, but I also knew we didn't need another biography of Poe that went A to Z through his life. We have a lot of them. We have many of those, so we didn't need another one like that. So that was one chance I took. And the other chance was to do interviews. And like, well, how do you do interviews with somebody who died in 1849? There's nobody alive who knew Edgar Allan Poe. There's nobody alive who knew anybody who knew Edgar Allan Poe. So, you know, I approached it as not only maybe a journalist or a documentarian would, but also as a detective on the case would. What do? You find witnesses. You find, well, in the case, my witnesses were people who have minutely studied little aspects of Poe's life and career. These professors, these academics who have spent, and it was also a way of giving them credit for what they have done. But I also went to, as you know, forensic anthropologists, forensic pathologists, FBI agents, detectives, medical historians, and a group that I thought would give me particular insight into Poe was horror writers. You know, that I went to people like Stephen King and Anne Rice and asked them, because, you know, I think that's one thing where we missed, is like it takes a very particular psyche to be very good at this form of writing.
Yes,
absolutely.
What does it take? Well, who's going to know that? Where are you going to find the insight for that? You're going to find it from the people who are the descendants of Edgar Allan Poe. For at least for that part of his career, which he was very good at. I mean, I said at the top that those few stories have defined him with good reason. He was better at it than anybody else. He was fantastic at it, and we're still, those stories still hold up. There's still models of how to do it. So these were my witnesses. These people, these were the people, and put on the record, and then I used their voices throughout. And I knew that was taking a chance, because you're not supposed to write a biography that way. You're supposed to spend all your time in dusty archive. And I did spend my spare time with archives and museums and such. But I wanted those alive voices, because one of my arguments is that Edgar Allan Poe is more alive now as a writer than he was in his lifetime.
Absolutely.
So I wanted very current, alive voices. And I knew that those two were taking a tremendous risk with the book. And you know, books are always taking a chance, but with this one, I really felt like I was going off the high diving board, not really knowing whether there was water in the pool or not.
Right.
You know, you're going to find out when you get down there whether you know, these chances have paid off or not. So, you know, when the book was done, I knew at least it was a book in an expression of who I am as a writer. You know, because again, you can't pretend to be a different kind of writer. So, you know, somebody says that, well, I don't like the book because it's not that, you know, say, fair, that's fair, because, you know, this is the type of writer I am. And this is very much a working writer's biography of a working writer.
Yeah.
You know, it's very much what this is. And I am fascinated by the creative process. You know, and I never would like the answer of who the guy was who wrote those stories. Even if you only know Edgar Allan Poe as the author of The Telltale Heart or The Black Cat or The Raven or whatever, it still does not tell you who that guy was who wrote those stories and why he was so good at it.
Yeah.
You still have to get behind the stereotype and the caricature to know who the actual artist was who was so good at writing those stories.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, you know, so I'm very grateful for what you're saying, about, because again, you never know until you do the book to your point of satisfaction, and you send it out into the world, and you hold your breath a little bit and go, is the world going to see what I see?
Yeah. Well, I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It because it was different than, like you say, an A to Z from birth to death. And also kind of talking about the mystery behind his death. I've always been very fascinated with that. I know Jeanie as well. Jeanie's got a little bit of forensics background or criminology, however you want to say it. And so I loved reading, that part of it.
That, I decided that when I have to, just as background for this, I have to tell you, this book was not my idea.
Okay.
I have to cop to that. You're going to find out very shortly, if you have not discovered it already. I have no shortage of ego. That's never been a problem.
Nothing wrong with that.
But I do not have the hubris to say I am the person to write the next biography of Edgar Allan Poe. I'm the person to do something somebody hasn't done before. I just didn't. Now, Edgar Allan Poe is a writer I've carried through my entire life. And even at that, and I've always been fascinated. I have performed Poe for 20 years. With all of that, I would never have suggested that. This book was the suggestion of an editor at St. Martin's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it came out because I had done a book on the Twilight Zone in 2017 for St. Martin's. And when a book does well enough, there is in your contract what is called an option clause, which, the option means you have to offer your next book to the publisher who published this book. It doesn't mean they're going to publish it, by the way. They don't have to publish it. The option is all their option.
Okay.
So you offer it them, and then they can either pass and you can go to another publisher, but you have to offer them your next book. So the Twilight Zone book had done well enough in hardcover and paperback to sort of have that discussion. And this was in the fall of 2019. And I was having this discussion with an editor at St. Martin's, and sometimes it takes somebody else to point out the obvious in your life. Somebody else who's got a little bit more perception than you have on yourself, which is very hard to do for yourself.
Yeah.
So we started the discussion, and I gave him what I thought was my best super slick can't miss idea, and the only problem was it missed badly, and he didn't like my idea at all.
Okay.
So he countered with what he thought would be a good idea for me, and I didn't like his idea. And then I hit him with my second best idea. He didn't like that. He countered. I didn't like that. And we were going back and forth like this. And then it kind of got to the point where we figured we're going to table this conversation for another day. And we'll pick it up. This was not a contentious discussion at all. This was a very friendly, congenial discussion. But we were getting to the point of, you don't like anything, let's just revisit this. And we were just about to get off the phone, and he said, "What about Edgar Allan Poe?" And I said, "What about him?" And he said, "Well, it seems like it's been a while since there's been a major biography of Poe." And I said, "It seems like there's been a couple fairly recently." And then I thought back, Jeffrey Myers, the Silverman, those are in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's 20-something years ago, So I said, okay, all right. But then it was like, what kind of book? And this is where, when I said, "Why did you say Edgar Allan Poe?" He said, "It seems like it checks a lot of your boxes." And I said, "How do you figure that?" And he said, "Well, Edgar Allan Poe is the father of the modern detective story. You have written a book about a landmark detective character with Columbo.
Yes.
Poe was the father of the modern horror story. You have written books about major horror topics like Dracula and the Twilight Zone. Poe was a critic most of his writing career. You were a critic most of your career. Poe was a major 19th century American author. You have written books about Mark Twain, a major 19th century American author. How does this not check all your boxes?" And and I thought, you're right. But then again, it came to what kind of book, and it very quickly became apparent he wanted Well, there's this type of book that appears every couple of years, and you're going to know it as soon as I say it.
Okay.
Every couple of years, it seems, we get that book that purports to solve the mystery of who Jack the Ripper was.
Yes.
I think we're up to about 15 definitive answers on who Jack the Ripper was. And there's going to be another one in a year or so that's going to say that we have solved it. And he wanted that kind of book that would solve the mystery of Poe's death.
Okay.
And I said at that point, if that's the book you have your heart set on, if that's the book you really, really want, there's one thing you absolutely need to do right now. And that is you need to go find yourself another lunatic, because this one's driving away right now. Let me tell you why that book cannot be written. A, no death certificate. B, no autopsy. And even if there had been an autopsy, it would have been worthless, because the state of the autopsy at that point was extraordinarily primitive. Few people knew how to do them, and they would have been conducting them with the equivalent of butcher's knives and machetes.
Absolutely.
No death certificate, no autopsy, no surviving soft tissue that can be subjected to modern forensics. And maybe worst of all, no reliable witnesses to Poe's death. Is that the witnesses to Poe's death not only contradict each other, they contradict themselves. And
absolutely.
Various accounts they leave behind. Most notoriously John Moran, the attending physician, who leaves behind 3 accounts wildly different in tone and detail, going so far as to change Poe's last words, going so far as to change the time of death. I mean, can you imagine what a modern attorney would do to John Moran if they had him on the stand?
Yeah.
There would be nothing left but shredded underwear when they were through it.
Yes.
So I said, so for all these reasons, this is a cold case, and it's going to remain a cold case. I said, but hear me out. This is the book I will write. I'll write you a book that examines Poe's life, because I'm much more interested in how Poe lived than how he died. But I will use the mystery of his death as the filter through which we will examine his life. And he really liked that idea. And I said, if I can come up with a theory which I think is compelling, convincing, and logical, I will present it as such. I will not go so far as to say that I can prove it, because that would be irresponsible. So I said, do I have a theory as to how Poe died? Yes. Do I make any claim that it can be proved? Absolutely not. I'm not even sure I want. If I had a Pandora's box and I could open it and prove it, I'm not sure I'd open the box. Because there's something wonderfully romantic about the father of the American detective story, leaving us with a mystery that continues to baffle us.
Absolutely. Of his death. Yes. I totally agree.
So some mysteries are not meant to be solved. I'm not so sure this isn't one of them.
Yeah.
So, but that's but it's the reason I kind of reversed the subtitle. The main title, A Mystery of Mysteries, comes from the poem Spirits of the Dead, which Sarah and I perform Spirits of the Dead, and it's not one of his better known poems. And he wrote it when he was very young. He was still a teenager. He may have just turned 20 when he wrote Spirits of the Dead.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, I love
a lovely poem. And Sarah loves it so much, she keeps saying, "You can have it read at my funeral. I want you to have it read at my funeral." I keep thinking, why does she think, I'm going to outlive her anyway?
Right.
But we close every show that we do with Poe on Spirits of the Dead. And we come
nice.
together and we alternate. And of course, the title comes from the last stanza, which, is "The breeze, the breath of God is still, and the mist upon the hill, shadowy yet unbroken, is a symbol and a token, how it hangs upon the trees, a mystery of mysteries." And that's the title of the book. Yes. But the subtitle is reversed. It's "The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe." And it's reversed for a lot of reasons. One reason is because with most people, when you discuss their life, you start at the logical point, which is when somebody is born. That's when you always start, it's logical to start. Well, with Poe, every discussion of his life always seems to start with his death. It always seems like we start there. It's like,
it's true.
First thing that comes up. And so that's one reason it's reversed. The second reason it was reversed is that Poe gets buried a lot in his lifetime and his afterlife. You know, he's literally, we know, you know, one of the things we know for certain sure is that he stops drawing breath on October 7th, 1849. We know that. And then we know for certain that he's buried the next day in a small Presbyterian cemetery in Baltimore on a cold, windy, miserable, overcast day in a service attended by very few people.
Yes.
And then we know the next day he's buried again when Rufus Griswold publishes his infamous obituary. And he's buried under a mountain of misinformation and lies and malicious slander. And, you know, Griswold does damage to Poe that has not been undone to this very day.
Absolutely.
So then, you know, and then they dug him up in 1875 to put him in the better part of put the monument in at the better part of the cemetery, and they buried him again. I mean, this guy just keeps getting buried, you know. And then here comes the 20th century, and we bury him under all of the caricature, and we make him the grandfather of goth and all of that. But, you know, everybody who's ever read Edgar Allan Poe knows there's one hard and fast rule, and that's nothing stays buried in an Edgar Allan Poe story. So, and he ain't going to stay buried.
No.
He's going to come zooming out of the grave triumphant, and he is going to outlast, outlive, and outshine all the people who are supposed to outlast him. And that's the reason I reversed the subtitle, is because Edgar Allan Poe has the best afterlife of any writer.
Yes.
He is the best read American writer, not only in his own country, but around the world. And it's not even close. There's not even a good second. And he gets reintroduced in curriculum. God bless the public school system. He gets reintroduced by the pop culture and the public school system. It's a great 1-2 punch.
Absolutely.
So everybody gets Edgar Allan Poe.
And, they do. And I get to teach Poe in the spring semester. I teach freshman English and in public school, and the kids love it. And especially since this new series on Netflix, The Fall of the House of Usher, has come out, some of my students from last year have, you know, that know how much I really like Poe. My students this year know I like Poe, but they don't know how much yet. And my students from last year keep running. Have you watched it? Have you watched all of it yet? Tell me what you think. And so it's exciting to see their excitement for Poe, because that's really kind of helped them as well.
And I can't tell you how many times teachers have told me this. Told me, you know, we love teaching Poe, and the students love getting Poe. And what a great age to get Poe!
Absolutely.
You know, 7th grade, you know, and you get Poe 7th, 8th, 9th, right through high school, then into the college if you take you know, overview of English courses, any kind. You're gonna just keep getting Poe, but that first one, 7th grade. It's just, I mean, because for most kids in the 7th grade, reading is just a bloody chore. Most kids do not like to read. I mean, there's always the exceptions.
Yeah.
But most kids at that age, they don't like reading, and they hate reading assignments. And then all of a sudden we give them Edgar Allan Poe, and Edgar Allan Poe is, you know, dismembering corpses and locking people up in torture chambers and walling them up in catacombs. And all of a sudden the reading's a bloody joy. It's not a bloody chore anymore, but also a tremendous jolt to the imagination.
Yeah.
And it's a great age to get something which is, oh, this is reading. This is fun. This is great.
Exactly.
So, which is, you know, my father got Poe. During the Depression, pre-World War II, my father got Poe in the public school system.
That's awesome.
And he loved Poe. And I mean, can you imagine we giving these same stories to kids by a contemporary author? If we were giving these same stories and they were by a contemporary author, and the parents found out you're giving them stories where people are murdering and dismembering corpses, you're giving them these, there would be an outcry from one end of the country to the other, and nobody says anything about Poe.
Yeah.
And that's because they got it. That's because the parents and the grandparents got it, and they already love Poe. They're getting Poe. Oh, that's wonderful. That's great.
Yes.
You know, it's just it's one of the great things about Poe. Poe is our renewable literary energy source.
Absolutely. I agree.
And that's one of the reasons why, and people not only recognize Poe, they get an image of Poe. They get you say Edgar Allan Poe. Well, we put Poe on posters like the one behind you. We put him on T-shirts. We put him on tea tins. We put him on ties. We put him on buttons. We put him on plushies. We've got Poe action figures. I mean, you go into a bookstore and there'll be shelves of merchandise devoted to Poe. Where are the shelves for Melville? Where are the shelves for Emerson? Well, they don't exist. And Poe, we market him. We commercialize him, we market him, so people get this. When you say the name Edgar Allan Poe, they not only get an image of Poe as of what he looked like, they also immediately know of the Telltale Heart, or you don't have to explain those things. I've spent the year giving talks in several states on Poe. And after every talk, somebody comes up to me and says, when I was in school, I had to memorize the first 4 stanzas of The Raven. And then they do it. And I always let them, and I'm always delighted. And they know it, and they don't miss a word. Once upon a bit weary while I pondered weak and weary, go, go, go. And it's and it's just like, who could do that for any other American author? I mean, can you imagine somebody coming up to you and saying, I had to memorize the first 4 paragraphs of this Washington Irving story, or or this Herman Melville, or this Longfellow poem. And so there's a connection to Poe that does not exist with any other writer. And I'd say any other writer. I'm not even saying American writer, any other writer. It's a connection that does not even exist with Shakespeare.
That's true. That's true. Because I will say most kids, especially nowadays, they don't like Shakespeare as much, just because even though Poe's prose was very wordy, but the descriptions are so heavy and just open, like you said, opens up your imagination. They connect with him much more than Shakespeare because they feel like they're reading a foreign language sometimes. And so, I know, because like we do Romeo and Juliet the same time we actually do Annabelle Lee, because it's a star-crossed lovers unit, and they're like, "Can we get through Romeo and Juliet so we can get to Poe?" And I'm like, "Just hold on, we're gonna get there."
So yeah, absolutely. I'm like I said, and my interest in Poe actually precedes the seventh grade.
Well, yeah, we were going to ask, when was your first introduction to Poe?
I became a horror fan at the age of 7.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in New York, and there was a station in New York, dear old WPIX Channel 11, and they see. And I don't want this to sound like the night the old nostalgia burned down, but when I was, when I was growing up in New York, we're talking about the early 60s,
Okay.
So there's no Nickelodeon, there's no Disney Channel, there's no, entertainment which is designed specifically for children. Right. So what they gave us when I was growing up was they gave us the entertainment of our parents, and in some cases our grandparents. So the very first children's entertainment I remembered on local television was Laurel and Hardy, and the Three Stooges, and Abbott and Costello. And so we got comedy teams, and we got a steady diet of it. Yeah. So by the age of 7, that was kind of the primary influence for me. That was my first kind of introduction into the pop culture. And when I was 7 years old, Channel 11 showed a movie called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Okay, yes.
I was there for the Abbott and Costello half of the title. I didn't know what a Frankenstein was. But, in the middle of that film is, playing Dracula for only the second time, and magnificently, is Bela Lugosi as in the cape. And that performance and that film turned me into a horror fan. I was so just fascinated by the imaginative process of all of this, that I immediately started to seek out any other horror stuff. That was stuff I was watching, The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. I was waiting for the next Hammer horror film to come out. In the movie theater, I was watching Dark Shadows when it came along in 1966. And I was scouring the TV listings because for an old Universal film or a 1950s film, science fiction, horror film. And when you start to do that, you very quickly become aware that there was this guy, Edgar Allan Poe, who had an enormous influence on all this stuff so I knew the name Poe before the seventh grade because of this. So somewhere between, like the second grade and the seventh grade, and you both remember the Scholastic catalog that they would bring around to your class.
Yes. Love that.
Right. Well, so did I. So you scour for your most likely, and the Scholastic catalog, and I don't know. This probably was about the fifth or sixth grade, but they had 10 Great Mysteries by Edgar Allan Poe. This is the actual book I ordered. This was how
I remember that book.
This was the start of on which my entire Poe library was built.
That is awesome. You still have that.
So this was that, and then they also did one called 8 Tales of Terror. It was the Scholastic. Nice. So these two, these 18 tales, and it included the Black Cat, and the Telltale Heart, and the Cask of Amontillado, and the Fall, the House of Usher, and the Purloined Letter. So I had a pretty good introduction to Poe before the seventh grade.
Absolutely. That's really cool.
Well, we're talking about when we first got introductions. My introduction to things happened through, and this is going to sound really strange, but radio classics. Because my family was not, we didn't have a TV for the longest time. And it was radio classes like the War of the Worlds with, Orson Welles. And then it moved up to Paul Harvey. And not a lot of people remember Paul Harvey, but Paul Harvey was great because I still remember his voice and the stories that he would tell. My first favorite black and white horror film was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in the 1930s. And that was the first horror film I remember watching, was that one. But moving throughout my I'm like you, I have so much eclectic things. I go from, my Scholastics cover all the ghost stories, all supernatural that you could find, up until, you go into criminology. I got the Hardy Boys. Hardy Boys were my jam, okay? Because I loved all the Hardy Boys. But the one thing that really I love the most about Poe, and especially it still being in the schoolroom, is that it just gives kids the chance to have that curiosity. Children have lost their curiosity and have lost imagination because they were being given everything. It's like it's so instant gratification. They can find it on the internet. They see everything. But with Poe, you have to, and we've discussed this in our Poe Unplugged so many times, he builds the story, but he leaves it to the reader how they feel about the story or how they feel about the characters. Just like behind me, the Cask of Amontillado. In that story, you don't know which one you actually want to root for. Which one's going to get justice? Is there justice? That's the one thing about Poe. Poe has that storytelling down to a science. And it's so great that he's still alive today. And in my opinion, he's getting more now after he's dead than he got while he was alive.
No question. No question about it. And I love what you just said, because I taught a writing class at Kent State for 10 years. And I would teach it each semester. And at the end of the class, I would talk to them and about, and I say, everybody wants to tell you what's wrong with you. You are the millennials, and everybody has this idea of what's wrong with the millennials. The first thing they're going to start with is that you're lazy, or you're stupid. And I said, I've gotten to know all of you, and I get to know, a new group of you every few months. And you're not stupid, and you're not lazy. They don't know you. And whenever anybody takes a ruler out and makes a blanket statement like that, you know you're dealing with a closed mind. You know you're dealing with anybody who does that to any group of people. You're dealing with a closed mind. I said, but I tell you what, you're not. And I said, if I could give you one thing, if I could magically give you one thing, it would not be wisdom. It would not be opportunity. It would not be happiness. None of those things would I give you. I would give you one thing, curiosity. You are not curious. And I said, and it's not your fault. It's been drummed out of you because we've given you these things since you're we're able to walk. You get these things. And and I said, and I said, nothing happens without curiosity.
Yeah.
All the other things happen because it starts with you being curious. And if you're not curious, you don't go anywhere. You stay in one place if you're not curious. And I said, and that's the one thing I would give you. And I would give them examples of this. I'd say, for instance, I showed you a film called Nosferatu. For most of you, it was your first silent movie, your first foreign movie, and your first black and white movie. A lot of you didn't like it. You were bored by it. You were perplexed by it. But at least half of you thought that was cool. That was really cool. And that's great. That's wonderful. I said, but in 10 years of teaching, not one student has ever come up to me after I've shown Nosferatu and said, are there any other movies like that? Could you recommend something else like that? And that is true of act. I mean, if I had seen a movie with an actor or by a director at that age, my first question would have been, what else did this guy do?
Yes.
What else did, and I think that's one thing that is very much lacking. And I think, and again, and a lot of it isn't their fault because the culture has, we were encouraged in our youth because with fewer channels, we sampled a lot more.
Yes.
And we had this thing that, now people look at this as kind of banal, but it wasn't. We had these things called variety shows. And even something like the Ed Sullivan Show, within an hour, you might get opera, country music, ballet, jazz, rhythm and blues, tap dancing, old vaudeville, new comedy, rock music. You got a chance to sample all of this people's culture. How many of you became jazz aficionados because of the Ed Sullivan Show? Because they saw for the very first time, a jazz great on the Ed Sullivan Show or one of these other. Now everybody goes to their own corner of the pop culture, and we don't share anything anymore.
That's true.
We have more channels and more choices, and people get less exposure to the wide variety of what is cultures. So that's one of the things which I agree with completely when you're talking about curiosity. Is a word I use a lot, and when I talk to writers groups, I say, nothing happens without curiosity. Never mind what you don't get to wisdom without curiosity. You don't get to imagination without curiosity. But it's got to start there. It has got to start there. And it just amazes me how to do that. That's true.
Yeah. Now, when I used to teach writing, when I taught English, I had to retire. But when I used to teach English, before they brought me their stories, I would make them just write a story, not give them any parameters. I would just say, write me a story. And I said, if you bring me that story and I have to ask why, or I have to keep saying why, then you haven't told me the whole thing. You haven't given me a story, because I need to know why. And that is the question that these kids don't ask anymore about anything. Everybody accepts everything now, whatever you're told. Nobody just wants to ask question why. And like you were saying, when you were, watching Nosferatu, wow, why was this so phenomenal? Where can I find more of this? Why did I like it so much? Why do I want to watch something like this? And like you said, the variety shows, I got interested in jazz, Ella Fitzgerald,
right.
All those wonderful, Billie Holiday, she was one of my favorites. And it was always like, why was it so drawing to me? Why was I so drawn to it? And a lot of it was, I was never introduced to that when I was younger. because it was not in my little world. Now there's no such thing as a small world.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, with this right here, these telephones in our hands, they think they have everything there is in the world. And so they don't need to search out and find things. They don't need to look for things. And Poe, you know, he's still alive and well because I think he is the reason that people are just like, well, wait a minute. Why? Why do I still want to watch, you know, read Poe? Why is he so interesting?
And you know another thing, a point which I make a lot, something you were talking about, is that Poe's short stories are like models of how to write a short story. I mean, first off, Poe writes with all his senses. You know, you take something like The Telltale Heart. He uses all the senses, so he makes you hear the sounds, the littlest bit of sound, the withdrawing of the latch, and the littlest sound that it makes, light, and how he plays with light, and the gradations of light, and the pale blue eye, and he puts you in that room, and he makes you feel all of the things that are in there. And for all of that he does, Poe only tells you so much. Poe didn't write for the theater. I mean, he tried to write one play, and he never finished it, and it was a failure. But most writers of that era did not write for the theater. They did not think the theater was a outlet for literature. It's not till the end of the century that people like Ibsen and Shaw start to make people think again, oh, this could be literature.
Yeah.
So, but you could tell Poe inherited from his parents. Those are perfect monologues. The Telltale Heart, no wonder every actor loves to perform the Telltale Heart. They're perfect. He tells you only so much, and not like, who's he telling the story to? But is it even a he? There's not one thing about the Telltale Heart that is gender specific.
Absolutely.
And I've made the point, people say, oh no, it's a man. I said, go back and read the story. There's not one thing that trips you. You're just assuming. You're just assuming this is so. You know, who's the narrator talking? Is this the keeper of the asylum? Is it a police officer? Who is this? Who is he talking? Is it a doctor? Same thing with the Cask of Amontillado. Who's Montresor telling the story to? Is Confessor at the end of his life? Is this confess your sins on your deathbed and you get a free trip to heaven? Is this what this is at this point?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, when they read Poe, especially like with the Telltale Heart, a lot of people place Poe as that narrator. And I don't think Poe wrote every story as himself as the narrator.
Well, that is, you see, the blowback to Griswold comes, from some of Poe's friends. And Poe was not friendless, and he did have a lot of friends who did rise to his defense. But the primary defense from Poe in the 1800s comes from the French, led by Baudelaire. And in some cases, they do as much damage to Poe as Griswold did, because even though they adored Poe, it kind of thrilled them to think that Poe's genius came from a touch of madness.
Yeah.
So they were the first to sort of encourage the idea of confusing Poe with his unreliable narrator. Well, Poe is the one talking to the bird and the raven. Poe is the one contemplating revenge in the Cask of Amontillado. Poe is the one who is driven mad by his obsession with the pale blue eye and the Telltale Heart. And this became such a strong way of viewing Poe that the illustrators of Poe's stories in the late 1800s actually start to draw the characters to look like Poe.
Yes.
You start to see this going into the stories. And then, you get into the 20th century, and this becomes part of how Poe is taught. When I was in high school in the early 70s, and we got Poe in high school, the teachers basically encouraged that view of Poe, was that, this was him doing all these things, and that undercuts his genius as a writer.
Yes.
That does is Poe was not brilliant at this because he was mad. He was brilliant at this because he was in total control of his art.
Yes.
And the more you study how he wrote and how he constantly revised and how he looked for every perfect word and later scratched it out in a later version of it, and he was always improving it and he was always working it. This is a master craftsman.
Yes.
Who is so Poe is a genius. But he
Yes.
wasn't a genius because he was mad. He was a genius because he could depict madness. And he could not
Yes.
depict that unless he was in total control of that. So
Hmm.
it's one of the things that that drives me up the wall. I know a lot of Poe scholars get vexed about this
Yeah.
because this is one of the things which has led to our misunderstanding of Poe. We have embraced not only Griswold's caricature of him, but we've embraced Baudelaire's caricature of him, and neither is true. Neither is anywhere near true.
Well, I know when my husband and I travel some, and if it comes out in conversation, meeting people in places, and I tell them about the podcast, the one of the first things they say is, "Well, Poe was on drugs, and drunk all the time when he wrote," and it's like, no. Have you ever tried to write anything if you even have had one drink?
Right.
And trying to be creative. Well, no. And I'm like, you can't. I mean, yes, you can write some things, but that was not him.
It's one of the things that is documented about his life. We know there are these long periods of sobriety where we went
Mhm.
12, 14 months without ever touching
Yeah.
anything, and where he was absolutely dedicated to his work, his profession.
Hmm. Yeah.
And again, alcohol, is it a problem for Poe? Yes, but it's not the problem that everybody thinks it is.
Right. Exactly.
One drink had a devastating effect on Poe, and it had a
Hmm.
devastating effect on his system, and it took days for him to recover.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It wasn't just a simple morning hangover for Mr. Poe. He,
Exactly.
it took him a long time to recover. So, he's allergic to alcohol.
Hmm.
Poe's problem is he always takes the wrong time to drink. If
Yes.
there's a bad time to take a drink, that's when Poe's gonna drink. It's like
Yes.
it's like if there's the imp of the perverse, that's what Poe has, the imp of the perverse. If there's the wrong time to pick a fight, I mean, the point where you're almost incredulous, when you're reading a biography of Poe, you're thinking, really, really, you thought this was the right time to pick a fight?
Oh,
This is the right thing. This guy's trying to help you.
exactly.
He's constantly pulling the rug out from under himself.
Oh.
So yeah, but again, as you said, common sense tells you that
Mhm.
nobody can only live to be 40, leave more than 17 volumes of work done at such a high level of writing,
Yes.
and been under the influence of alcohol the whole time. Common
Yeah,
sense tells you that's impossible.
exactly. Oh, I know. I know.
And
Well,
again, there's no evidence. Even his worst enemy, Thomas Dunn English, didn't said there's no truth that Poe took drugs. I
oh,
mean, the
yeah,
only drugs Poe took were the ones which were prescribed by doctors.
exactly. Oh, I
And
know.
so the whole idea that he was a drug addict, the whole idea that it's like I can't remember which curator, which Poe site, whether it was in Baltimore or Philadelphia or Richmond, but one of them said that somebody showed up and said on the take a tour and said, well, the only thing I know about Poe is that he died drunk in the gutter. And he's like, no part of that statement's true. You don't know anything about Edgar Allan Poe. I mean,
Oh, my goodness.
so
Uh,
that's how persistent the caricature is. That's how
yes,
incredibly persistent the caricature is.
absolutely.
I mean,
And,
one of the things that drove me nuts, one of the things that in interviewing all those horror writers and actors and directors and all these leading practitioners of horror, one of the things that struck me in interviewing all of them was what great senses of humor they had. Almost
mhm,
all of them were richly funny people. And if you
yeah,
notice, fans of horror tend to be very funny people. You
yes,
want to hear laughter, go to a horror convention. You can
yes.
be surrounded by laughter. And and when I mentioned this to Stephen King, he said, well, of course, a sense of humor is an essential part of, your DNA if you're a horror writer, because if without it, you'd go crazy. If you're writing, this is what keeps you sane, this is what keeps you grounded. And humor and horror are flip sides of the same coin. They're the
Yes,
two metaphoric devices we used to approach and analyze difficult subjects we don't like to think about.
absolutely.
They're very big subjects or painful subjects. And I mean, they're twins, humor and R,
Yeah.
and they even look like twins. They're, two syllable words starting in H, ending in R.
Hmm.
Um, and it struck me that if all of them had this great sense of humor, it was so essential to them, then Poe must have had a sense of humor. It's like the last thing we grant him. And yet, the more you discover about Poe, the more you realize he had a wonderful sense of humor. He was very funny. He wrote as much humor as he did horror. We just don't read the humor anymore, but he loved writing the satires and the hoaxes and the humorous sketches. But if you're looking carefully, you'll see he's very funny certainly in the criticism, which is what he was best known for in his lifetime.
Yeah.
He's very funny in the reviews, but he's very funny in the horror stories if you're paying attention.
Yes, he is. Absolutely.
Particularly the Cask of Amontillado. He's got that whole thing of, Montresor saying, "No, we must go back. Your health is precious. You're a man to be missed. To me, it is nothing." And finally, Fortunato has that coughing fit and he can't even talk for a while. And Montresor says, "Enough, we must go back," and Fortunato says, "Enough, it is a mere nothing. I shall not die of a cough."
That's the truth.
And if that's not enough of a laugh line, Poe then has Montresor say, "True."
Yeah,
exactly.
And he's letting you in on the joke. Poe knows what he's doing. Poe knows exactly what he's doing. When Sarah and I performed the Cask of Amontillado, and she does the voice of Fortunato, and I do Montresor. So, and we get to that line. I hit that line true, and the people fall out of their chairs.
Oh, I bet.
So Poe knew what he was doing. He knew, so he's very funny. Even in the horror stories, he's very funny. I mean, to this day, we don't really know whether the system of Dr. Feather, Professor Tar, we don't really know whether that story was written as satire or to be somewhat of a real horror story. The same thing is true of a couple of the horror stories, which we can now look at and say, was he being like the case of Monsieur Valdemar?
Yes.
It's so much over the top. It could be satire.
I agree. Yeah.
And it ends. I mean, it has probably the biggest gross out moment of any Poe story in it, and it's so over the top that you wonder, is he satirizing like the run of the mill horror stories that appeared in a lot of the magazines?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you see that story put into both horror and humor collections of Poe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're still not sure about that one.
Yeah. It's I know like we just read Never Bet the Devil Your Head in Poe Unplugged, Jeanie, 2 months ago? October. It was, I think, October. Yeah. And everybody loved the satire from that. That one's just classic, with how Poe wrote it.
And it's still one of his best. I mean, it's still one of his most effective, best humorous pieces that does hold up very well.
Absolutely.
But again, but Poe, he was personally funny. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He was very, he was known for being, he was raised to be a Southern gentleman. He had a very, very lively wit, and so these are things we deny Poe. Because we make of him the relentlessly gloomy, melancholy, guy drawn to the death culture and all of that. And, and is there an element of truth to that? Well, yes, of course, there's an element of truth to that. Did he play up to it? Yeah, he did that too. We know that, he loved to dress it. And when he gets a certain amount of fame from the Raven, we know he's playing up to it. We know,
absolutely. He was playing Poe.
There's that lovely story of him, going for a walk in the neighborhood kids in New York, following him, throwing pebbles at his heel and sneaking up and getting as close as they dare. And he would wait until they got just close enough, and then he'd wheel around and shout, "Nevermore!" And they'd go screaming off into the night. They loved it. They loved it. And he loved it.
That would have been amazing to see. Oh my goodness!
So I mean, you're dealing with somebody who, I don't want to make, because again, I think Poe would have been a tremendously difficult friend. I think, I think Poe would have been the very definition of high maintenance. There was one, Poe scholar who said, it's in the book, has said, like, if you were sitting home alone on Sunday having dinner and there was a knock on the door and you had a little peephole in the door and you could look through and you saw it was Poe, you might pretend you weren't home, You know, you just know it wasn't going to be a happy story. You know,
Mhm.
a couple of months ago, I was doing a Poe talk, and during the question and answer period, somebody asked me if you could have dinner with either Mark Twain or Edgar Allan Poe, which would you choose? And I mean, I didn't even have to think about it. I said, oh, Mark Twain in a heartbeat. You know, we're going to have a good time. You know, we're going to smoke a couple cigars. We're going to have some scotch. We're going to tell funny stories. We're going to have a good time. Poe's going to be, you know, Poe's high maintenance. He's definitely, now, having said all that, I would have loved to have been Poe's friend. I would have loved to have been able to go back and say to Poe, don't worry, you're the one. You're the one they're going to remember. You're the one they're still going to be reading, you know. And I said that to one of the Poe scholars and said, you know, you wish he knew. And he said, I think he did. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? I think you're right. I think he did, because Poe knew he was a genius.
Yeah.
And that has really got to make you lonely, to be the only one who kind of sees. Yeah, because the 19th century isn't very good to Poe, because one of the reasons that his contemporaries could not see how good he was because we were into uplift. I mean, the whole idea of literature was that there had to be a moral. There had to be an obvious moral. And this leads to the Chautauqua movement. And the Chautauqua movement isn't very kind to Poe, because they don't embrace Poe. They do like people like Longfellow and the poets of the heart, who give you the obvious moral and the American fortitude, and it's all this. It's really the 20th century. We had to catch up to Poe.
Yeah.
In the 20th century, Poe comes into his own, because the 20th century gives you the horrors of the First World War and the Depression and the Second World War and the atomic bomb and the Holocaust and the arms race. And all of a sudden, Poe brings on a resonance, because he's telling us things about ourselves that maybe we don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And he really becomes the writer of the 20th century. He's a much more modern, for all the archaic language that he uses sometimes. Thematically, he's very modern. And I think that is one of the reasons we're still reading him, and we're still, because while the other writers have faded and their fashions have faded and sort of naivete have faded, Poe now has a resonance he didn't have in his own lifetime.
That's very true.
And yet he knew. And yet, you know, I mean, one of my favorite Poe stories that's in the book, that after he finished the Raven in 1845, it had not been published yet. He goes for a walk. He's living in Manhattan, and he goes for a walk, and he encounters a young friend from Kentucky named Wallace, who is a poet, who's also a poet. They hail each other in the street, and Wallace says, Poe, how are you doing? And Poe says, great, I'm doing great. I have just completed the greatest poem ever written. You know, and what do you say to that? I mean, how do you respond to that? So Wallace sort of said, well, that's good, you know, that's good. And Poe said, no, you don't understand. I have just completed the greatest poem ever written. And then he recites it for him. This is the first public performance of The Raven on the streets of New York to an audience of one.
Yes.
And he completes it. And what do you say? You know, Wallace says, like, well, that is fine. And Poe roars, fine? Fine? That's all you can say? Fine? This is the greatest poem ever written. He knew. Yeah. He knew what he had done. Now, writers are basket cases. We get done with something, and the first thing we do is we second guess ourselves. I mean, I think every writer, you know, when they say I'm going to become a writer, they're issued a favorite coffee mug, a copy of The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, and a raging case of imposter syndrome. You know, is everybody, you finish something and you go, oh, I don't know, should I have done this? Should I have done that? Poe completes The Raven, and he knows what he's done. Well, that's Mozart. Yeah. That's a level of so. Was Poe lonely in the sense that he is probably the only one who sensed his own brilliance? You know, at a time when the world is lauding Longfellow and the New England writers,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and not only is that, is he's not being recompensed for any of this. He's not being fairly
Yeah.
recompensed for his labor. There are no copyright laws, so he pays a few dollars for a short story as brilliant as The Purloined Letter, or a
Oh
poem as
no.
brilliant as The Raven, and then it gets reprinted free in every other publication up and down the coast.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. It makes you sick that,
mhm.
you know, that he had to go through that.
Yep. So I mean, he is everything he gets now he deserves, and more than
Yeah.
deserves.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And like I
He
said,
was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
way ahead of his time. I said we
Yes.
had to catch up. You know, we had to catch up to Poe, and
Yeah.
it took the 20th century, I think, for us to really understand that. I mean, there was a whole academic bias against, but there still is somewhat of,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the
Yeah.
poetry, which still exists. I think that, and then this goes by T.S. Eliot said some pretty awful things about Poe, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
has remained in the academic bias against him. But
In my opinion, he didn't have any room to talk because T.S. Eliot is still not one of my favorites. But okay, he had his own problems. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Well, Mark, tell us, you've mentioned a little bit here and there about playing Poe, in or reciting and
yeah, I
things
don't
like that
play
with your
Poe.
wife. Yeah. So tell us a little bit like what how many different plays, or what's your favorite one, not plays, stories. It's that time of night where I'm getting sleepy.
All
Um,
right.
like what stories, poems are your favorites to do?
We perform a selection. So, and so what we do is we each do a major story. So,
Okay.
um, Sarah does The Mask of the Red Death,
Okay.
and brilliantly. And we do it in costume. We do it in period costume.
Oh,
And
nice.
we lace biographical information about Poe throughout in between.
Okay.
So the one who is not performing set introduces the next piece that the other one does.
Gotcha.
So we each do a long poem, we each do a short poem, and we each do a story. So I do Annabelle Lee,
Nice.
um, El Dorado, the
Hmm.
short poem, The Raven, and The Cask of Amontillado, with
Okay.
Sarah doing the voice of Fortunato. And then Sarah does the bells and Alone, um, and The Mask of the Red Death. And then we come together at the end on Spirits of the Dead.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay.
it's a nice, it's a nice, it takes about, we do it in one act, and we can do this in about an hour and 10 minutes, basically.
Okay. Okay.
Because, but the Cask of Amontillado, the Cask of Amontillado, the Telltale Heart, and the Mask of the Red Death are all 5,000 words, almost exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which means you can perform them word for word, not leave anything out, and do it very concisely, and do it in about 12 minutes,
Okay.
12,
Hmm.
15 minutes. You can
Hmm.
do the whole thing. So that's why I say they're perfect monologues. They really are.
Yeah.
Some of the stories take a while to get going, and he builds. There's like the House of Usher takes a while to get going.
Oh, yes.
The
Yes.
whole thing and the description and things like that. And House of Usher is a much longer story.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
to perform that in its entirety would take about half of your time. So
Okay.
it is not quite the perfect monologue that the Telltale Heart is, or
Hmm.
the Cask of Amontillado is.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So is one of them your personal favorite, or
Oh yeah.
which one?
To perform the poem would be Annabelle Lee.
Okay. Yeah.
I just
It's beautiful.
it is. The Raven is difficult. I am only now getting to the point that I think I do the Raven reasonably well.
Okay.
It's taken me probably 15 years.
Wow.
The Raven is very difficult. There's so many gradations, and
Yes.
you just getting
Yeah.
everything exactly right. And there's nights when you think I've got this section really well, but that's but yeah,
Yeah.
the last year or so has been a breakthrough year where um, I'm no longer scared of performing the Raven, and I actually look forward to
Oh,
performing.
yeah. Okay.
But Annabelle Lee has always been, it's just a wonderful piece.
Yeah.
And the language is wonderful, and I just there's something about that one that just got me. And then my favorite story is the Cask of Amontillado, because I just think it is so much fun to do
Oh, it
that.
is. It's one of my favorites.
We performed that a few years ago, and one of Sarah's best friends was in the audience, and when we got through, I got one of the best compliments I've ever gotten for a stage, because she took Sarah aside and said, "I'll never completely trust Mark again."
That's a good compliment right
And
there.
I said, "Thank you, thank you."
Oh my goodness!
That's fantastic. And it's such a delicious piece. It's so wonderful, and I love the theatricality of it.
Yeah.
And getting to play that whole thing, because Montresor is playing the whole time.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And yet there's these moments where you're not sure, where he talks about being heartsick, and where he's overwhelmed by what he's doing, and it's just all of these things you get to play in this.
Yeah.
His contempt for Fortunato,
Yeah.
where he's, Poe doesn't put things in quotes, but there's lines in the Cask of Amontillado where you can see where he calls him the noble Fortunato.
Yes.
Exactly. You see the air quotes hanging there, and you're going, I saw that.
That's how good he is, in what he does. So I mean, what he gives you to play. So that's the Cask of Amontillado is definitely my favorite piece.
Yeah.
It is the perfect example of Poe's leaving it to the reader how you feel. Because every time I read that, it doesn't matter. I switch every once in a while. One minute I'll be for Fortunato, and one I'll be like at Montresor, and then I'm going, wait a minute, which one should I actually be, wanting justice for here?
And Fortunato is such a horse's ass.
Exactly.
And yet nobody deserves to be to be walled up,
I know.
So it's one of those priceless pieces to where you're going, well, I still want to go back and read it again, because maybe I missed something and I should be, wanting to wall him up for good and just be done with it. So here.
It's one of those stories. It's in my top 5 of Poe stories that I just love, and at the really tip top. And it's one that I can go back and read. I could probably go back and read that every day. I love that story so much.
And because I have to because you said what's your favorite. Now, if you said do you think this is his best, I would say no. I don't think it's his best. I think it's my favorite. But and that's because of a very personal connection to it.
Right. Right.
Getting to perform it. But I'd have to argue that I don't know what the greatest short story ever written was, but I know that if anybody was assembling a list of 10 great short stories, the Telltale Heart's going to be on it.
Yes.
That is a perfect model. I mean, it's a perfect thing to give somebody, to show them how to write a short story.
Yes.
How to write with all your senses, how to write with, the economy. There's not a wasted word in the Telltale Heart.
Absolutely.
And I had to, I didn't have to. I was honored to do a story for Publishers Weekly, where they asked me to pick the 10 best Poe short stories, and I said, I don't like best. That's a very subjective term, and everybody likes best this 10. It's not a horse race, for crying out loud. I said, I tell you what I will do. I'll put together, and I'll call it the 10 essential Poe.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Even confining that to 10 is difficult. But I started with the Telltale Heart.
Okay.
Certainly started there, because I do think it is, the end of the 10 where, it's murder not to put the Black Cat on that list, but the Black Cat and the Telltale Heart are very similar.
They are, yeah.
And if you're going to do one, you got to do the Telltale Heart. And the same thing, I hate to leave out the Murders in the Rue Morgue, but the Purloined Letter is the height of his art as far as the Dupin stories go.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you make very difficult decisions, and you got to put in the House of Usher, and you have to have certainly the Pit and the Pendulum.
Yes.
So and then some stories which I think are a little bit of surprises, like Hop Frog, which I think is because there, unlike the Cask of Amontillado, you are rooting for the person who is out for revenge. You are totally on the side. And in some ways, the payoff in that one is even more grisly and more horrible than the Cask of Amontillado. So yeah, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Poe, is he gives you these, these wonderful. I mean, again, if I was going to put one mystery story on the list, it would be the Purloined Letter.
Yeah,
but in his lifetime, the Gold Bug was the most successful of his, of his stories of mystery.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I enjoyed the Gold Bug as well, and I like the cryptology aspect of it too. It's fun going in and looking at all that part of it.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Poe too is, everybody think, this guy spent all his time in cemeteries and, hanging around graves and all things like this. And Poe had an amazingly acquisitive mind. You talk about curiosity. Poe was interested in everything.
Yeah.
I mean, Vincent Price once said, and he wasn't talking about Edgar Allan Poe. He was just making a point, but he might as well have been talking about Poe when Vincent Price said that the person who limits his interests limits his life.
Yeah.
That's a great quote. It's a wonderful quote. And Poe was, Poe is interested in geography and languages and rocks and flowers and expeditions, and he was just interested in everything that was out there.
He wrote a story about seashells, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a textbook.
Well, he wrote it. I mean, he was actually kind of doing a rewriting. It was his most successful book.
Yes.
And who would think that seashells would be a successful book that you would attach to Poe when you're going?
Oh, I know.
Like monster seashells, were they like?
It's one of those things where when I tell audiences about the Poe who the real Poe, and again I say that in his lifetime Poe was not best known as an author of short stories or as a poet, but as he was best known as a literary critic, and a very good one. He's an excellent critic.
Yeah.
The people that Poe praised deserve to be praised and he was praising people like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Irving, and the stuff he panned was largely stuff that have been forgotten and deserved to be forgotten. And he was a very good critic, and the person who most recognized that was George Bernard Shaw later on, because Shaw was also a critic as well as being a playwright. And Shaw basically said, that Poe was the greatest journalistic critic of all time, and he should be. It's like somebody, I can't remember who said it, but somebody in the book said that everybody wants to claim Poe. The mystery writers want him, the horror writers want him, the science fiction writers want him. The one group that doesn't make a big deal about Poe but should are critics, because he really was a terrific and a very astute critic. And but that's what his time knew him first as a critic, second as a poet, third as a short story writer. Our time is reversed that order. We know him first for the short story, second as the poet, and third, if you know it at all, as a critic. That, as we were talking about before, just begins to define how much he wrote, his literature.
Absolutely. Well, and I think in a lot of the collections that are out there, I have a couple collections, and even like my big collection doesn't even have everything, absolutely not, but it has a few criticisms, and it's at the very end. I've kind of glanced over them, but we focus so much on the short stories and poetry. I've told myself I've got to sit down and read some of these and find more out there. But I wish someone would put a book together of his criticisms. I think that would be a really interesting read and help people understand how diverse Poe was.
I'd like to see actually a modern official complete works.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Because I really do. And it probably, somebody like the University of Virginia would probably have to tackle it.
Yes, absolutely.
But I would really, because again, our collected Poe editions are pretty out of date.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody has really tackled the, sort of the full Monty that
Yeah.
really deserves to be done for Poe. And
Yeah.
it's not like Twain, where to do a complete works of Twain is going to be the work of several lifetimes. We would never live to see it done. But with
Right.
Poe, we it could be done because he only
Mm-hmm.
lived to be 40, and there is a lot of writing there.
Yeah.
But it's not like Twain, where you have, and with Twain we're still discovering new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We're still discovering new letters every year. We discover letters we never knew existed. So
Okay.
but Poe, I would like to see, but I'm also, there were 2 more books on Poe were just published this year after mine, and I'm delighted by that. I just think
Mm-hmm.
it's beautiful, that you keep seeing this interest in Poe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. Jeanie, what other questions did you have for Mark?
No, he's answered everything I was curious about.
Yeah.
I say that once again, thank you for sharing your book with us, that it was very much
Yes.
it did have its academic quality. I will say that because of the research that you embedded into it, but I like the academia as much as I do the other things. And it did tell a story of 2 timelines converging. And a lot of people miss that technically we have so many unanswered questions about Poe that we can only implement what we do know and how we can find those answers from a forensics point of view. Because we don't have the strict, like you were saying, we don't have the tissue we can dig up and do a full DNA analysis to find out how he truly died. And it is ironic that him being the father of the detective story, him leaving us the perfect cold case of how he truly died and all that. So,
And you do go back, I guess I was saying before, how you always, with Poe, you start at the end.
Mm-hmm.
In one way, it's not surprising because, Poe has the greatest literary stage exit of all time.
Yes.
This is the best exit. I mean, there are 3 great literary stage exits in history. The first is Moliere.
yes.
Now, Moliere was a playwright as well as an actor,
Mm-hmm.
and Moliere was dying of consumption, and they were premiering his last play, and he's in the play, so he's dying, and he's trying to get through this performance of his last play. He collapses on stage. They drag him into the wings, they revive him, and they push him back out. He goes out and he finishes the play, and then he goes home and he dies.
Yes.
That is pretty darn good for a writer who is both a playwright and an actor. That is one. And then there's Twain, because Mark Twain, who was born November 30th, 1835, with Halley's Comet, at the point where it's closest to the Earth in the night sky.
Yeah.
And a year before his death in 1910, he correctly predicts that he will die when the comet comes back.
Yes.
And he does. He pulls it off. This is one of the great. In 1909, he tells an audience about him referring to himself and Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, that here are these 2 indefinable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together. I'm looking forward to that. And this is like Babe Ruth, predicting the home run. This is, he pulls this off. And imagine that. I mean, a hero being born and dying with a comet in the sky. That's something which would not have been out of place in Greek mythology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But in some way, Poe outdoes them all because he dies under circumstances which reflect his 2 greatest literary achievements. Poe actually dies under circumstances which would not be out of place in one of his own horror stories.
Yeah.
He dies lingering. He dies in pain. He dies ranting. So, that could be right out of one of his own horror stories. And then he dies in a manner that he leaves us not only with a mystery, but a double-barreled mystery, because he not only leaves us with the mystery of what he died of, but then there are the missing days preceding his death. And nobody has ever gotten anywhere near solved that either, because nobody ever stepped forward to say, I passed him on the street. I had a conversation with him on the steamer coming from Richmond. Nothing there. That is a complete curtain which has descended over those missing days, which we are not allowed to see. So Poe leaves us with not one mystery, but two mysteries. The father of the detective story dies under circumstances which reflect his two greatest literary achievements. And that's almost like a press agent stepped in at some point and said, Eddie, you know what the best thing for your career would be? Die at 40, die under circumstances which are going to be the two things you're remembered for. That's better. That's even better. So,
it's like his own press agent was standing off in the wings going, okay, this is what you got to do. And so I'm going to do it. The only thing that I could say that would probably make the perfect trifecta for his death is if they had found him walled up somewhere. And you didn't know how he got there, and you'd be like,
well, Moran tries that almost, because Moran at some point, because his descriptions of Poe's death become increasingly more Victorian melodramatic, and at one point he says, he writes something like, was Poe imagining a bird, a raven that he could see? I'm like, what are you doing?
That's just a little much there.
Not just reaching, but overreaching,
Oh, I know. Oh my goodness.
Moran puts words into Poe's mouth that Poe would have been ashamed to have had attributed to him, He'd
be like, stop trying to be my writer. I'm my own writer. I don't need to bring my words. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, but again, that's one of the things about Poe, is that all the people around him at the end are just, they're completely unreliable in testimony. So,
just like his unreliable narrators and all of, so many of his stories.
And it fits his characterization so much, it's not even funny.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, so Poe fascinates, but he's going to continue to fascinate.
Yes.
He's going to continue to he's not only going to continue to thrill us, he's not only going to continue to fire up our imaginations, he's not only going to feed our curiosity, he is also going to continue to haunt us, because there are aspects of Poe which will never be solved, thank goodness.
I welcome his haunting. I do.
Yes, me too. Just like Dolly was haunted.
Exactly.
Oh, well, Mark, what other projects have you got coming up?
Well, I'm right now working a book that I had published in '97. If you remember, it's a series called The Night Stalker with Darren McGavin.
I actually just listened to on Audible the collected stories. They were fantastic.
Okay. Well, I did a lot on that character back then. I did 2 nonfiction books and a novel based on that guy. I did the first original novel with Kolchak at 20 years that was published called Grave Secrets, which was published in '94. So that book has been out of print for a while, and so I'm working on revising that right now, and so that's probably going to come out next year, an expanded, revised copy of that. And then as far as what the next book will be, I could tell you, but I'll probably be wrong. Because I've never been right yet. I mean, I'm not kidding about that. I mean, my first book was published in 1982, when I was still living in that Tri-Cities area of Upper East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia. And if you had said to me at that point, what's your next book? People did. They said, what's your next book? It's a very flattering question, because it presupposes there will be another book, So if you had asked me then, what is your next book? I would have said, I know what the next book is going to be, because I've already started working on it. I'm going to write the history of the Twilight Zone. Why not me? It's my favorite show of all time. Never thinking to myself, maybe Upper East Tennessee isn't the best place to be writing a book on the Twilight Zone. Maybe that's not. the optimum headquarters for this. But I had written, my first book was a history of the Barter Theater in Abingdon, Virginia, which is this amazing theater, which was started in the depths of the Depression. Yep. I performed there. I performed as Mark Twain at the Barter.
Oh, nice.
And so that book was published in 1982, and two of the people who were got their start at the Barter had been in episodes of The Twilight Zone. Claude Akins and Fritz Weaver both had been in.
Yes.
And then, one day when I was working in Tennessee, Donna Douglas came to town, dressed as Ellie Mae Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. She was doing a commercial for like RVs or something. And I ran down to the production site. She'd been in a famous Twilight Zone episode called Eye of the Beholder.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I interviewed her. So I was doing enough to fool myself that this was going to be my next book.
Okay.
And then in 1982, I walked into a bookstore, and there it was, Mark Scott Secree's The Twilight Zone Companion. He wrote the book and published the book that I was thinking about writing. And I couldn't even get angry about it because he did a great job. It's a fabulous book. It still is a fabulous book. So I immediately set my sights on another favorite series, which was Columbo. And I spent the next few years researching and writing that book. That was published in 1989 as the Columbo File. Nice. And then if you had said to me then, what's your next book going to be? I'd say, I know what my next book is going to be because I have a handshake deal with this publisher who did the Columbo File. It's going to be on Dashiell Hammett, the mystery writer and the author of The Maltese Falcon. And I've got this great idea. They love the idea. I love the idea. We've agreed to it. We hadn't gotten to the contract phase. And then the company that owned that publisher, the Mysterious Press, Warner Books, stepped in and stripped away their nonfiction line and said, you're now strictly a fiction. So, and it was at that point, a small publisher called me and said, I love your Columbo book. Have you ever thought about doing the same type of book on the Night Stalker? And I said, well, I love the Night Stalker. I'm a reporter today because of Carl Kolchak.
Yeah.
I said, but I didn't know there was a publisher crazy enough to do that book. He said, well, I'm crazy enough to do that book. So now I did that book. That book led to writing the first novel, Kolchak novel. That led to doing books on Dracula and things like that. And what I was doing was I was working my way back to the Twilight Zone and didn't see it. Never saw it, but I was now getting enough sort of credits on the horror, sort of side of the street.
Yeah.
That when I started sharing the Twilight Zone with my daughter when she turned 15, we did a forced march through all 156 episodes. And I kept saying to her after each episode is kind of a joke, you let that be a lesson to you, and it was a joke. And after a few times of this, I finally realized it wasn't a joke, that the Twilight Zone really were morality tales. They were parables. They were all, life lessons. And I thought, this is your Twilight Zone book, stupid. It took 35 years to get it, but this is your Twilight Zone book. So, we all like to think we are in control of our lives. We all like to think we are masters of our fate. We are captains of our ship. We are making the command decisions. But when you step back and you look at the pattern of your life, you realized you were pushed into certain places where you were meant to be at different times. And you see how dominoes fell. Yeah. And they fell in a certain direction. And so every time I said, somebody asked me that question, what's your next book going to be? I was wrong. And I would not have said Edgar Allan Poe after the Twilight Zone book. I wouldn't have said Poe. I would have said, as a matter of fact, I was working on a book on Stephen King at the time.
Okay.
And part of that book became a book I did on the Shawshank Redemption. I did a book on the filming of the Shawshank Redemption, the making of it.
Nice. Okay.
And I went through that whole, thing of like, well, it's going to be about Stephen King. I got this great idea, and that book never got done. But an editor said Edgar Allan Poe. So I never saw that one coming. So, the quickest way to make sure that this next idea is to tell you what I'm thinking the next book is going to be, because it's not going to be.
Yeah.
I know enough. I know enough to say, trust. You go where the currents take you.
Yeah.
And you cannot predict where that might be. Just go with it and understand that, there is going to be a next book, but, I'm not foolish enough to predict it anymore. Yeah.
So in essence, it's just follow you, and you have no idea where it may come to. So
I'm talking to my agent about 2 or 3 different ideas. There's one that she particularly likes.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as she said that's the one she really likes, I said, and that's why it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
Because you think it's a great idea, and
Yeah.
like, look, I didn't think of this Edgar Allan Poe book, and you didn't think of this Edgar Allan Poe. It was an editor at St. Martin's who saw something in me to say, you should be the person to do this.
Yeah.
That I said, remember, this isn't, we didn't think of this one,
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say sometimes it takes somebody else to point out the obvious.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
And
true.
that was true of this conversation with this editor. He saw it correctly, and then when I decided to do it, it scared the hell out of me,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. John Steinbeck once said that a good writer writes scared.
Yeah.
And what he meant was you should tackle things which are challenging enough that it scares you a little bit, because if you're
Yeah.
not scared a little bit, you're doing something that's safe.
Yeah.
You're doing something that's in your comfort zone, and you're not pushing yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
you should be a little scared by what you do. And certainly when you set out to write a biography of a subject as big as Edgar Allan Poe,
Mm-hmm.
that's like going after the great white whale. That's
Yeah.
Yes.
you have to be a little crazy to do that,
Yeah. It works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but he was wonderful company. He still is.
Yeah.
He really,
Absolutely.
it's like I said,
Definitely.
dinner with Mark Twain, but I would love to have been Poe's friend.
Yeah.
He would definitely have made it interesting.
Mhm.
Oh yes,
Probably
definitely.
want you cussing him half the time, but he would made it interesting.
Well, Mark, do you have anything else you would like to add for our listeners?
I'm sure there's something.
It'll come to you eventually, right? That's the way it works for me.
Yeah, because it
I
has been great talking with you this evening.
Thank you. The only thing I would add is that if there is something of a common theme in what I write, it is about writing. It is about my love of writing and writers, and an awful lot of what I've done is sort of behind the Twilight Zone book is Rod Serling.
Yeah.
There have been books on Mark Twain. Behind the Shawshank book is Stephen King. Here's Poe. Coming along. There is an ongoing fascination and celebration of the written word in what I do. So, and with Poe, I guess I just never stop celebrating, because the language is so wonderful and the stories are so terrific that that's why he's going to go on. That's why, again, he's always got something to tell us.
Yeah.
And a lot of what he tells us is about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's things we don't want to hear.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, the Mask of the Red Death. I mean, if there is a greater indictment of human vanity and pride, I don't know what it is.
Absolutely.
And boy, did that story take on more resonance during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Poe was writing at a time when the plagues were much more recent, touchable thing. So he was also living at a time when communicable diseases were all around him, particularly tuberculosis.
Absolutely.
His mother dies of tuberculosis, his father dies of tuberculosis, his brother dies of tuberculosis, his wife dies of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
His his foster mother dies of tuberculosis.
Yeah, way too close to home for him. Yeah.
So, almost everybody, probably a staggering percentage of the population was contaminated with tuberculosis, was walking around with tuberculosis, whether it was active or not. It was probably in your system. There was probably no escaping it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of would it go active and when would it go active.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, being a teacher, even today, the one test you do still have to take as part of, doing all of your interviewing, processing, fingerprinting, all of those things is a TB test. which I think is very interesting, that you don't get tested for other things, but that is the one that you do get tested for. It just, I find that fascinating.
Yep.
Well, it is a disease that's still around. I mean,
right.
My cousin who owned goats, if you have goats, you have to have a TB test because goats transfer and have TB still. You can still find that disease in goats.
I knew somebody who whose elderly father, he was in his early 80s, and he went for she took him for a medical checkup, and they gave him a really thorough medical, and the doctor said to him, "How long have you had tuberculosis?" And the guy said, "I don't have tuberculosis." He said, "Your lungs say otherwise."
Oh,
and so I mean, it is possible, for that to be there, and it's just not be effective. You'd be strong enough, it heals over.
Yeah.
But you're carrying those nodules around in your lungs, and so yes, it's a disease which has been around and has been documented in ancient remains.
Yep.
It's one that still is around. It's a very persistent little bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, on that note, Mark, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was awesome talking with you and talking about your book and all the other Poe things. And we cannot wait for you to be on our Poe Unplugged with us. We have a really awesome group that joins us, and everybody, will have read the Cask of Amontillado, and we'll talk about it, and can't wait to hear some of your thoughts on it, mixed in with our group. It'll be great.
You've heard a little bit of it tonight, so you got a sneak preview.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm sure several of them will probably listen to this by the time we do that. So.
Well, and in that case, obviously, you've already discovered I like to talk.
Right,
and that's okay. That's okay. We like when you talk.
and I'll be glad to that night as well. But I'm going to be more interested in listening and hearing what people have to say. So I'll be glad to contribute in any way. But I already know what I think about the Cask of Amontillado. So
yes,
yeah, they'll be happy to share. Trust me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they'll probably want to hear what your take on it too. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's one of his last great short stories too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got that golden period from around 1838 to 1845, which is when most of the, really terrific poems, short stories, everything. And then there's that last blossoming of poetry, that return, that triumphant return to poetry at the end.
Yeah.
You kind of, the very beginning is poetry and the very end is poetry.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he's got that almost like a dying patient having that rush of health at the end. And, in that period, you get the bells, and you get Annabelle Lee, you get El Dorado, and you get all of these wonderful poems at the end. So, the Ravens kind of signals the return to poetry. It's 1845. It's at the end of a very creative period. But the Cask of Amontillado is in that same time period. He doesn't write many short stories after that.
He really doesn't. Yeah.
Hop Frog is one of the few.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, one of the very few short stories that he writes towards the end.
Yeah.
And that is an endlessly fascinating story.
Yeah, and he really considered himself a poet, and I think to me that's kind of with the Raven and him considering it as big as it was. I think he really wanted to go back to being a true poet. It
Not
seemed
just
like
a poet, but a romantic poet.
Yes.
His hero is Lord Byron.
Yes.
And he emulates Byron dressing in black and sort of puffing up his resume to be a little bit more adventuresome than he was. And, Byron is definitely the role model. And and I think it was Ed Pettit at the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, a wonderful Poe scholar. I think it was Ed who said, and it's in the book, he didn't get to be Lord Byron. He got to be something better. He got to be Edgar Allan Poe. And how much better is that than being Lord? Who reads Lord Byron today?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, the one piece Lord Byron wrote. He got to be Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, I remember reading that in your book, and I was like, that is beautiful. That's awesome.
Yep.
That is
Yeah,
awesome.
that's one of the things about the not to prolong the conversation, but
It's okay.
one of the things that I was very tickled about in the book was when I went to all of these Poe scholars, academics, and museum curators. One of the things I encouraged them all to do was don't talk like you're talking to another academic. Remember, you're talking. Ultimately, you're going to be talking to people.
Yeah.
You're not going to be. So don't talk like you're writing for each other or you're talking to each other. A very boring conversation. Say this the way you would say anything. Say this the way you would say. And I think that was a very liberating thing for them because they allowed them to talk about Poe in a very personal way.
Yeah.
And it also gave me, because they would say something like that, like Ed said about that, you know, and as soon as he said it, I thought it's gold. It's going right in the book. As soon as they said it, I said, that is gold. And that's going. That's going in the book. It's like at one point, it was Ed again. The Poe's. There's something of a rivalry among the major cities associated with Poe as to who has the best claim on Poe. You know, Baltimore has obviously done the best because the whole city has embraced Poe in a way that most cities don't embrace literary people. Even the football team is named for. I can't think of another sports team of any kind that is named either for a literary character or a literary reference. So I mean that alone, and Baltimore likes to say within this competition, they like to say, we have the body, we win.
Exactly.
But
in the house, in one of the houses,
and they had one of the few surviving houses where Poe lived, that tiny little row house. And Poe didn't live in Baltimore that long. I mean, he's there in the early 1830s, and the Poe family is originally from Baltimore, and he dies there.
Yeah.
So, but Richmond is probably the city of his heart. But the museum there has no direct connection to Poe. It's a wonderful museum, but
it is.
But he grows up in Richmond. It sort of shapes him. So Richmond has a very strong claim on Poe. Baltimore has a strong claim on Poe. He's born in Boston, and he really lives in New York. I mean, for the last 5 years, and that's where he's living when he dies. So, but the city that gets lost in all this is Philadelphia.
Yes,
because he's in Philadelphia from 1838 to 1844. He's there for 6 or 7 years, and these are the golden years.
Yeah,
these are the years when he writes almost all of the great short stories that he's known for. So I asked Ed Pettit, I said, put it, how would you make the argument for Philadelphia? Which always gets lost in the Poe conversation.
Yeah.
And Ed said, look, when you go into the Baseball Hall of Fame, you go in under the uniform for the team for whom you put up your big numbers. Poe put up his big numbers here in Philadelphia. And I thought, what a great way to say it.
That is.
Good. That's going right in the book. That is word for word going right in the book, and it's a wonderful way to make an argument as to why Philadelphia has this claim on Poe. Philadelphia even has one of the few houses associated with Poe. One of the 5 houses that he lived in Philadelphia is still standing.
Yeah.
So, but that's the kind of thing I encourage them to do. And they all came through. They all came through with just wonderful things like that. To give you an insight to Poe that you can't get by sort of very strict scholarly analysis.
Right.
This is playing it for real. This is why is Philadelphia important? He put up his big numbers here. That's why.
Yes. Oh yeah. And
he hit his home runs here.
Yeah. And when you go into the basement of that Philadelphia house,
Black cat comes
alive.
The
black cat. It's like, where is he?
He's not. We know he wrote the Black Cat while he was there, and you do sort of really feel it. So I mean, you've got the house and the cottage in Fordham. You've got the house in Philadelphia and the house in Baltimore, the museum in Richmond, and the room at the now what Boston has is the best statue.
Yes, it is amazing.
Boston has the statue in Richmond is kind of staid, and then the statue in Baltimore is better. The statue in Baltimore is better than the statue but Boston's got that amazing.
Yeah, and you can walk right up to it. I've gotten my picture made there multiple times, and
Boston has sort of made up for lost time with that statue. So you got to give them full credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. Well, again, Mark, I'm just in awe. It's been amazing talking to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, this is a subject near and dear to my heart.
Yes,
or my telltale heart, if you will.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
The opportunity to talk about Poe is just, I'll grab it, and obviously, I'm not going to be shy about it.
Yeah. Oh no, and we are glad you were not shy. And I mean, we could probably sit here and talk several hours longer because we both love Poe, and my Poe back here is always on the wall with my Poe Museum Black Cat calendar. So
I noticed that. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, just got the new one for next year. But yes, so again, thank you, and we really look forward to you being with us for Poe Unplugged on December 19th.
We'll have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Jeanie, are you ready?
I'm ready. We are
Poe
out.